Hello, everyone, and welcome to APQC's webinar on 2024 Supply Chain Priorities and Challenges. I'm Marisa Brown, APQC Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management, and I'll be sharing with you today some of our most recent research into supply chain. In terms of our agenda, every year we gather insights on what organizations are focusing on for the coming year. And today I'm going to share those results for 2024. We're going to start by taking a quick look back at how supply chains ended the year in 2023 when it comes to meeting their goals. And then we're going to shift into our forward gear and examine some of the expectations and trends facing supply chains this year. And we're going to spend most of our time looking at the top 4 areas where organizations are going to focus this year and what their priorities and actions are. And I do want to just mention that we'll talk a little bit about the future and the key word for this year, which is really uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns out there. And just a quick heads up, I've got 3 polls scattered throughout this presentation, so please participate and let us know your thoughts. A quick note about the research that underlies this presentation. So this is our 10th year collecting this information from a global audience. We look at, again, how organizations performed the prior year, what their current focuses and plans are for the coming year, and also what kinds of trends and expectations they see for supply chain over the next 3 years. We had 352 respondents this year in our research. They span multiple industries and multiple regions. We have participants from the Americas, from Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and as well as Asia Pacific. We've already published a white paper and an executive summary, and I will provide links to that at the end of the presentation. And you're able to access a cross-industry survey report to see the full set of data. APQC members can also find industry and sector-specific reports, as well as comparison reports on this data. All of that will be available at the end of the presentation under the recommended resources section. And the purpose of our research is really to gain insights into the experience, expectations, and anticipation for supply chain from professionals around the world. And every survey that we do does have different respondents, but we always cultivate a globally diverse cross-industry set of participants from a variety of supply chain roles. Our annual surveys incorporate a mix of contemporary, of-the-moment issues, as well as evergreen topics for the discipline. So let's start by taking a look at how we ended last year. How did supply chains perform? And last year was, as many of us know, we lived through it, a year of continued disruption and challenges for supply chain. But first, I want to know from all of you, we're going to open a poll for you to respond to. How did your supply chain do last year? Was your organization on target for achieving your business goals in 2023? Select one of the options. Yes, we hit our target. No, we missed. I don't know. It's a fair answer. Or I'm so embarrassed because it was so terrible. I don't even want you to know. So take a moment and let us know how your supply chain did. And then we'll compare your information to that we gathered from our research participants. So take just a moment. Please vote in our poll. Let us know how your organization performed last year. And as we know, it was a year of all kinds of unexpected things. You know, I don't think if we had a bingo card that we would have expected some of the challenges to global trade and some of the unanticipated cyber attacks that happened as well. All right, well, we're going to close the poll and let's see what y'all shared. All right, well, 44% of you said yes, you hit your target. 31% missed, and 26% not so sure. And thankfully, none of you were too embarrassed to let us know. Well, this is really interesting because 44% hitting the target. So let's take a look at how our research participants did. Only 38% said they hit their target. So a slightly smaller percentage. So thank you all, and congratulations for those of you who did have a successful year last year. But you should know that not everyone did. And we actually found this to be the worst year of the past 5 years, aside from 2020, where everything went sideways. So we found that also in our research participants, only 20% said that they were on target or exceeded their peers or their competitors' performance. So that's also a drop from what we've seen in the past. We've been tracking this information, and here's the past 5 years, how organizations did. And you can see that the 38% from this year was lower than every other year aside from 2020. And we also saw this drop in how organizations are doing versus their peers or competitors. So this was a rough year. And maybe we all thought it was going to be a better year as 2020 gets further and further in the rearview mirror and we're living in more of a post-pandemic world. But it was a challenge. It was a hard year for many companies and many industries. And we are going to now look at, okay, so with that context, knowing that we're coming off a rough year, what's ahead for 2024? All right, so we're in the spotlight. We've got a lot happening. Here are the top 6 trends that our research participants anticipate they're going to have to face over the next 3 years in their supply chain. And it's interesting to note that several of these top trends are related to technology. And I don't think anyone has a supply chain today that doesn't use technology in some way, shape, or form. But at the top of the list, we see big data and analytics. And this has actually been at the top of the list for at least 3 years running. And that's because there's so much data coming at supply chain, whether it's data coming from internal sources or external sources with your suppliers on one side and your customers on the other. Making sense of all that data requires some help. And that's where big data and advanced analytics comes into play. And then we see supply chain digitization or digital supply chain in second place, only slightly behind big data and analytics as a trend that's going to impact supply chain. And as we see organizations integrating physical processes with digital data and tools more and more, they need to make sure that they're getting a sufficient return on their investment. So we see that there's a lot of technology focus, but also new for the first time, we introduced data management, and it debuted in the 3rd spot on the chart. This is where organizations are understanding that essentially garbage in is garbage out. And if your underlying data isn't accurate and isn't well managed, then your forecast and everything else based on that data is unreliable. So we're seeing also across the board, compared to 2023 and even years before that, an increase in how many organizations expect major impacts from multiple different sources. In fact, the big data and analytics doubled almost in how many organizations expected to have a major impact over the next 3 years. Now, rounding out the top 6 trends, we see process standardization come into play. And as we have more and more uncertainties affecting our organizations, this becomes critical. Having a plan A, business as usual is great, but you have to have different scenarios and different contingency plans for when things do change. When there's plan B, plan C, plan, E, F, G, H, I, J, however many you need for your organization to be able to respond, but those require standardized processes so that individuals can make the changes needed and know what to do. And then we see sustainability or environmental, social, and governance factors moving up the list as well. And this is an area where there is increasing regulation, changing regulations, more and more different sources of regulations, right? If you're doing business in the EU, then there's regulations there. If you're doing business in the state of California, there's regulations to comply with over there. And then the United States government is also coming out with some new things. So this is an ever-changing area that impacts all parts of the supply chain. And then we see cloud services. And the cloud really helped organizations survive when a lot of organizations sent their employees to work from home. We're still seeing some lingering issues from efforts to return to the office in some cases, but cloud services allow organizations and employees to access information they need from anywhere at any time. And taking a look at the rest of the trends that are expected to affect supply chain, and there's a lot of them, And I mean, these aren't small things, right? There's global trade and geopolitical risks. I think with what happened in the Red Sea at the end of last year and continuing on to this year, there's a lot of things that, you may not always know is coming, but you have to be able to react to. And that's where the resilience comes into play. Cybersecurity risks. We're seeing increases in ransomware attacks and other kinds of cybersecurity hacks. AI and generative AI, and I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically. Robotic process automation and blockchain. So all of these different trends in one way or another are going to be impacting supply chains. But one thing that's always very interesting to me is to overlay that with industry. So when we look at how do different industries rate these different anticipated impacts, no two industries are the same. So I split this into two images this year to make it easier to read. And these industries are listed in alphabetical order. But you can see that something like sustainability or ESG is in second place for automotive, but down at the bottom for consumer products. Whereas big data and advanced analytics is at the top for financial services and banking. Every industry has its unique aspects and different priorities. But if you take a look here on the next slide, you see that these trends all in one way or another are impacting organizations across the industries. And everyone who registered for this webinar will receive these slides and the recording. So you don't have to take any crazy notes or anything, but just look at the difference you can see between organizations like pharmaceutical and industrial products, right? There's very little where they have the same priorities. So that brings us now to, with all these trends impacting us, what's keeping organizations from being successful in improving their supply chain processes? So let's open the poll and please vote for the number one thing that you think is keeping your organization from making improvements. Is it lack of budget or resources for process improvement? Is it concerns about your talent or your labor? Do you have staffing shortages? Are you experiencing strikes or anticipating strikes? Is it lack of collaboration inside and outside? Lack of governance or poor data management? Is it implementing new technologies, all the sensors and the AI and everything? Or is it regulations and requirements that are making it hard for you to change things? So please select one of these. I know that you may be impacted by all of them, but which is the biggest obstacle? And then we'll take a look and see how you all compare it again to those organizations in our research. All right, so let's go ahead and close the poll and see what we got. All right, so top place, 37% is lack of collaboration. So this has been in the top two for the last 3 years at least. Lack of collaboration is a huge problem. The good news is that APQC has a lot of resources you can access to help with this. But behind that, we see lack of budget or resources for process improvement. And in the third place, we've got lack of governance or poor data management. So that's very interesting. Thank you all for sharing. And let's see what our research participants said. So some of the same top challenges. In the number one spot, though, was implementation of new technologies. So it's not necessarily that the need to buy the technology, it's implementing it, how to use it, how to really integrate it in daily work and make sure that the way that individuals are working takes advantage of and leverages all the new technology that's been implemented. Because one of the things I think a lot of us kept hearing during the pandemic was that organizations accomplished in 3 months what used to take 3 years when it came to adding automation. And so now senior leadership is saying, okay, we added all this automation. What's this, what do we have to show for it? What's the return? And that's where this implementation of new technologies is key. And then right behind that, we see lack of collaboration, which you all rated as the number one. And lack of collaboration sometimes is tied into some of the challenges with using the new technology. And what we see too is that there is an increased need for change management. As new technologies or the need for collaboration with new parties, new forms of governance comes into play, Many organizations are struggling with figuring out how to do that. And the talent and labor issue continues to be a concern in many industries across the globe. But we think also when we look at supply chains, back to the collaboration question, we look at them often as networks, right? You have a lot of different stakeholders in your own organization and your own enterprise, and then you've got external ones, and you have to work together. And increasingly, companies are talking to us about thinking of them as an ecosystem, that there are all these different players, and you've got to be able to respond to change and be resilient in the face of all these uncertainties. And how do you do that? So these are some of the obstacles that organizations are facing. And then you see the lack of governance or poor data management. And that's kind of that garbage in, garbage out, right? That's the, and the other thing we see is that this isn't a one-time fix. You can't just fix data management, clean up your data, your master data, let's say, and be done. It's an ongoing challenge. It requires continuous oversight and management, and making sure that you've got decision makers able to trust the data, not having to check and recheck it, helps improve your throughput or your productivity. So one of the questions we always collect information on is your organization investing in your supply chain when it comes to adding technology, tools, innovation, or other initiatives to improve it? And we continue to see the majority of organizations are investing. We're seeing that it's slowing down a little bit. So right now we see 56% of respondents say that they're going to increase the funding to their supply chain this year. And last year, it was over 60 something percent, 66%. Now, it's not that supply chains are any less important. It's that organizations have continued to raise the level of funding, and they're adding to that increased funding year after year. And regardless of whether budgets are going up or down or staying the same, it's important to think about where the spend is going. And technology is a common target for investment, but leaders also need to consider the state of the talent and the talent market. And competition for skilled talent, people with the right skills, is fierce. We also see organizations, unfortunately, going through some layoffs because of the uncertainty around the economic future. So just making sure that your organization sets aside a good portion of the budget to invest in people, whether it's training, retraining, raises, bonuses, new roles, or supplemental staff, it's all going to depend on your own strategy and circumstances. And even if you don't have staffing problems now, this is an area to keep an eye on and don't wait. Smart not to wait till you have a problem to try and address it. So I mentioned earlier that I talk a little bit about AI, and this was a new addition to our survey this year. And we looked at the extent to which organizations are planning or using AI currently for various supply chain activities. And we asked this question because we really want to get behind the hype in the headlines. Like, I don't think you can open a news source without something about AI, positive or negative. There's both sides of it being put out there, and a lot of it is about generative AI. But when we look at supply chain, and in our data, the 351 respondents to this question, only about a quarter of them are currently using AI extensively in different parts of the supply chain. And the activities on the screen are listed in descending order based on extensive plus moderate use, so current use of AI. And we see demand forecasting and predictive maintenance as the two areas with the largest chunk of organizations using AI today. And that's not surprising given the vast quantities of data that need to go into that and the unique value AI can bring to something like predictive maintenance. But what's interestingly is generative AI, which is really what's grabbing all the news headlines today, is only in use in 36% of organizations. And it has the largest percentage, though, of organizations that are planning to use it. 45% are looking to invest in it. And part of that, I think, is a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, and making sure that your organization isn't left out because of all the hype that we're hearing right now. But I think that there's a lot of other types of AI that are valuable in supply chain, and we can see that organizations are starting to use those and planning to increase their use over time. As AI evolves and its use in supply chain evolves, we'll continue to conduct research on that and share those results as well. But let's shift gears and look at supply chain focus areas and priorities for 2024. So this is where we look at the key functions that make up supply chain planning, sourcing and procurement, innovation and logistics, and also then we'll see where in those areas organizations are focusing. So first off, when we look at overall, where organizations placing their focus in terms of investing resources, innovation, and hiring, we see more organizations for 2024 focusing in more areas of the supply chain than in past years. So supply chain planning stays in the top spot 5 years in a row at least. We saw 90% of organizations saying, yeah, this is the focus for us this year. That's only a 4 percentage point increase from last year, but with the continued uncertainty and challenges that supply chains are dealing with, this is not a surprise. But we saw double-digit increases in percentages of organizations focusing on the other parts of supply chain as well. We see sourcing and procurement very close second in terms of organizational attention behind supply chain planning. And then innovation moved ahead of logistics and inventory management, which is very closely tied to order management and product development in terms of focus. But these are high percentages compared to what we've seen in the past. And then manufacturing rounds out the top 7. In this webinar, I'm just going to focus on the top 4, planning, procurement, innovation, and logistics. But I do just want to say a brief word about the others because they're also clearly important to companies this year and clearly an area where they're going to be focusing and investing. And for order management, what we see is that it's all about automation and digitization for what organizations are going to be focusing on so that they can help reduce non-value added time, specifically for customer service representatives. And there's a big focus on reducing errors from manual data entry when it comes to order management. Also, we see that reducing order cycle time here is a priority because that does help improve on-time delivery rates and ultimately customer satisfaction, which the end of the, what it's all about at the end of the day. In terms of product development, here we're seeing an increase in a focus on collaboration and new products are the way organizations make money. And what we're seeing is that new product development is a top focus area. From idea generation to concept testing, introduction, and beyond, organizations are making sure that they're focusing on resources and collaboration to get these new products to market. And also there's product management and planning, portfolio management, and product design that organizations are looking at here as well for this year. And then lastly, manufacturing. Last but certainly not least, depending on your industry, we see that these disruptions that are happening across the world are really challenging organizations that are in a manufacturing sector, whether it's getting raw materials from suppliers into the manufacturing process or getting finished goods, fully manufactured items out the door to customers. And so the number one focus area here is managing supply chain disruptions. It's not so much that you get to manage the disruption as you get to manage what your organization does in response to it. So now, just like we saw those trends vary by industry, here we see priorities vary by industry. So, for example, in electronics, we see order management at the top. And we also saw for this coming year, for 2024, industry-specific perspectives are having a bigger impact on focus areas than they did before. So again, there's 2 slides here where we're looking at different industries, and the industries are listed in alphabetical order, but you can see that sourcing and procurement is very important in financial services and banking, for example, whereas in retail and wholesale, innovation tops the list. So APQC has created some industry-specific reports on these priorities. So you're welcome, if you're an APQC member, to access those in our resource library. But now let's take a look and go into each one of the top 4 areas. We'll start with supply chain planning. So on each of these, we'll talk about the focus areas and also the actionable strategies that organizations say they want to do this year. Nearly half, 49% of our respondents, identified integrated business planning as their top focus area this year in supply chain planning. And this has definitely grown in importance over last year, because last year only 25% said this is where they would be focusing. And I think we're seeing a greater understanding of the value that can come from aligning business goals and collaborating both across your supply chain and with other key functional stakeholders in your business. You all, in fact, in the poll, identified a lack of collaboration as one of the biggest problems. And I think we see that reflected here in the focus on integrated business planning. Other top focus areas for supply chain planning include demand planning and forecasting, sales and operations planning, automation, and analytics. But we also ask organizations, well, how do you want to tackle this, right? What are you going to do this year to try and focus in these top areas? So what we're seeing here is evaluating, comparing performance through benchmarking. Everybody wants to know how everyone else is doing. That's kind of a human nature, but also we saw that as the pandemic took hold, as disruptions have increased and continue to maintain, this, I think the word I heard was perma crisis. In other words, we don't know what the crisis is, but we're going to have some kind of a crisis. It's permanent now. But there's an increased desire to understand how everybody else is doing. And what does our performance look like compared to others? If we're doing badly, is everybody else doing just as badly? And that can be a very important message to convey to senior leadership at times. But we also see a focus on improving that collaboration and communication that we talked about, new technologies, process standardization, and trying to improve forecast accuracy, which continues to always be a challenge. So sourcing and procurement continues to be the number 2 area for years where organizations are focusing from their supply chain. Depending on the industry you're in, if someone says supply chain, you might even think procurement. In some industries, you think logistics. But here we're seeing supplier or vendor relationship management in the top spot again. That's been for multiple years, since 2021. Multiple disruptions and all these challenges we're facing have really driven home that your supplier's performance is very tightly linked to your own performance. If you can't get what you need from your suppliers and you don't have a good relationship with them, your own organization's performance is at increased risk. And there's greater interest in improving collaboration and pursuit of mutually beneficial goals with your critical suppliers. Another important focus area is risk mitigation. We also see sustainability here as regulations are starting to include scope 3 emissions. So you need to be able to get some of this data from your suppliers and other critical stakeholders. And things that were voluntary in the past are now becoming mandatory. So there's a lot of focus here in sourcing and procurement for many companies. And there's a lot of new technologies and capabilities being brought to bear, as well as a need for standardizing processes. And I think that there's a need, as we look at the increase in the focus on technology here, again, for change management, because the technology changes the processes, and that's changing how work gets done. And that's changing what people do on a daily basis. And you need to make sure that people are not an afterthought, right? That they are front and center as you're transforming your organization, specifically here in sourcing and procurement. So innovation. Innovation is what helps an organization stay ahead of the curve when you're facing rapid changes, multiple disruptions, and all these different technology changes in our global world. So innovation has lots of different components to it, and APQC takes a very broad look at it. And what we see here is that operational or process innovation is the leading focus area for almost half of the organizations in our research. So what this says is they're looking at new and different ways of doing their work. But they're also not ignoring the need for innovation in their products and services, enhancing creativity, as well as some automation, and of course, ever-present collaboration. It's interesting to note that improving collaboration was top of the list for innovation last year, and it's still important, as we've seen across the functions, But this year, we see a rise in this need for operational or process innovation as organizations try and figure out how to better work with all their stakeholders. So those two actually go hand in hand. And we see the importance of recognizing your employees and engaging your employees. In fact, that's the number one most actionable strategy for this year is integrating innovation into organizational goals, tied with, of course, implementing these new technologies and capabilities. But what that means is that a lot of organizations are putting innovation in play as part of an individual's performance review. And what that does is it takes it from being something that they do, right? Maybe there is a dedicated innovation group, but it makes it something that you do as well and makes it more real for everyone. So I think that, me, not thee, is a way that organizations are bringing innovation front and center for people in supply chain roles. And then logistics and inventory management. And in line with the past several years, inventory management and inventory optimization is the biggest focus area here. And that makes sense because there is this need to balance cash flow with customer satisfaction, right? You don't want too much inventory because that ties up your dollars on a shelf, but not enough inventory, and then you can't service your customers. And as shipping becomes kind of an unknown, shorter and longer, there's a lot of things that impact your organization's ability to optimize this inventory level. But we see right there in second place now is supply chain visibility. And that really includes your second and your third tier suppliers. And that can help your organization anticipate and ideally mitigate disruptions so that you can make faster decisions related to your inventory. We also see warehousing and sustainability and advanced analytics as focus areas for this year. And about 2/3 of organizations are prioritizing their inventory optimization and looking for best practices for what really is working in companies to improve this. And about half are looking to benchmark and standardize their processes as well. And there's leading edge technologies and emerging and evolving technologies that can help with this need for deeper visibility and even some of the anticipatory kind of heads up that a disruption may occur. And these technologies, along with better collaboration and communication with your stakeholders, can enable the scalability and traceability for your logistics to be competitive. And I think the key is just keeping in mind that a resilient supply chain is not an option anymore, it's a necessity, right? You can't control these unknown unknowns, but you can figure out if this happens, then what is your organization going to do? We're definitely seeing an increase in scenario planning and war gaming, where organizations are kind of, huddling together and figuring out what the organization's response will be to unanticipated disruptions. And it kind of reminds me of when I was a teenager and learning to drive. My father used to always say, assume that all other drivers on the road are homicidal maniacs. It's a little bit unnerving when you're a teenager, but what it does is it has you driving defensively at all times. And I think when it comes to our supply chain, we can't let our guard down. We have to constantly be thinking about not so much that there's homicidal maniacs out there, but there's disruptions that are going to happen. And what can we do and be prepared? So we're 2 months into the year, which is kind of crazy. It's the end of February already. We're at a decision point in many organizations. Like, where do we go from here? It's no longer just a new year. We're almost through the first quarter. What's going to be the future? This brings us to another poll. Let's open the poll. And just how concerned are you about the future of global supply chains? Not just in your own company, but globally. Is this something that you're not at all concerned about? We got this. We've been through 2020, 2021, 2022, right? We know how to handle disruption now. Or are you extremely concerned, moderately, somewhat, slightly concerned about the future? Because this is an election year in many countries. Elections always have consequences, especially for supply chains. Supply chains are now in the spotlight. United States federal government is talking about supply chains in ways that in the past they didn't. We also are seeing global disruptions forcing new trade lanes and new rerouting of shipments in progress. There's a lot going on. But how concerning is that to you? Or do you feel like we're prepared? We've come up with our scenario plans. We know what to do if something happens, or rather when something happens. All right, well, let's close the poll and see. All right, well, there are a few of you out there who are not at all concerned. Please share whatever it is that keeps you grounded here. But what we see is that it's a pretty even split, with 34% moderately concerned, 31% somewhat concerned, a quarter of you are extremely concerned, and very few, 6% slightly, and only 3% not at all. So for those of you who are moderately or extremely concerned, I have a couple of suggestions for kind of moving forward with supply chains. And we also have the information available from APQC for things like how to drive better communication and collaboration across your supply chain. What kinds of techniques and approaches are proven to work for that kind of an activity? So a few key points. And I think we have seen that supply chains, even at the height of the pandemic, even in the most disruptive times, can flex, adapt, and bend. Pick your verb. But we've still been able to fill orders and move product. Now, maybe not as quickly, maybe not 100%, but supply chains have been persistent and will continue to be successful. But it's important to consider a few things, right? The evolving technologies, changing regulations related to things like sustainability, being prepared for cybersecurity threats and geopolitical conflict. So here's a couple recommendations. First off, don't forget the role of advanced analytics and digitization. Many companies I speak with are undergoing digital transformation. Make sure that you use that to make better decisions. Make sure that your data and your processes are sound. Shore up your foundation, because you can't invest too much in ongoing data management, because that is what will keep your organization making effective decisions going forward. And you have to stay aware of changes in the external environment. I mean, gone are the days when you can forecast demand based on last year plus X%, right? We don't know. It's important to make sure you're leveraging technology and other trusted alliances as part of your ecosystem, because things are happening fast and they're coming sometimes from unexpected quarters. So being aware of what's happening and then communicating and collaborating with your internal and external stakeholders. Because when these changes in the external environment happen, if you have a solid foundation and you've got good analytics and you've got your technology in place, you're better able to then collaborate and communicate and make decisions quickly. And then lastly, prioritize innovation as a core organizational goal. It's no longer the organization of yesterday that will be successful tomorrow. It's important to continue to keep your eye on changing in a positive way. And there's no denying that supply chains are in the spotlight, for better or for worse. So this is an opportunity for 2024 for all of you and all of the supply chain leaders in your organizations to show yourselves as informed decision makers, data-driven problem solvers, and trusted collaborators. So to give you a leg up on that, I've recommended some relevant APQC resources. And when you receive this presentation, all of these links will take you to our resource library. And I've got the white paper that we've written on these priorities and challenges. And then you can check out the collection. And that's where we've got the cross-industry survey report that is publicly available. And then we also have a lot of these industry and sector specific reports. And in each of the areas, we provided some recommended content. For example, I've called out some content pieces and some content collections where you can find multiple related pieces that are curated by our research team. In supply chain planning, we have a whole collection on supply chain resilience, and we look at it functional area by functional area, whether it's supply and demand planning, whether it's logistics, procurement, there's content there for everyone. In sourcing and procurement, we have updated and re-released our Reinventing Supplier Relationship Management paper. We also have updated guidance and checklists for different types of sourcing business models. So as you're focusing on your suppliers and your relationships with them, what are different things to keep in mind? We also have some current state practices, so you can benchmark not just the metrics, right? There's a lot of value in understanding cost and cycle time and these KPIs, but also what are the practices related to supplier risk? What are people doing in technology and automation? So all those collections are out there. In innovation, we've released a new white paper on ecosystems and open innovation. Co-create or stagnate. I think that, just like we've been talking, no organization is an island. The supply chain is only as strong as its weakest links. So making sure you look at your network or your ecosystem and collaborate and innovate accordingly. And in logistics, we also have current state practices here. What are organizations doing in areas like data management, digital transformation, and so much more? Last mile delivery even is an area that we've gotten questions on. And we do have information on workforce related practices in logistics. So all of this content is available in APQC's resource library. And now we have a few minutes to take some questions. First question we have is related to this research that APQC conducts. So one of the things that we do is we try and get a different sample of organizations every year, of people from around the globe, but we do try and look at certain industries year after year after year. APQC members are welcome to take the survey and participate, as well as non-member organizations that are in similar industries, similar size and complexity to our membership. And I got a question about where is all this information then brought together. So we do a survey, and I also follow up and do one-on-one interviews with a number of supply chain professionals in different industries across the world. I see that we also have a question about coordination. What is the silver bullet? How do we forge, improve coordination? How do we get players to believe in collaboration? Excellent question, thank you. So APQC has a whole research area, similar to my area that focuses in supply chain. We have an area focusing on knowledge management. And knowledge management is a lot about how do you get the information to people they need in a way they can use it at that moment when they need it, their teachable moment. But it also focuses a lot on collaboration. And we'll be re-releasing this month, March, I guess, a collection on driving collaboration across the supply chain and looking at specific approaches like communities of practice. And how can you structure one of those to get people to collaborate and coordinate across different functional areas? One automotive company, for example, that we've studied, set up a brakes community of practice. So you're not always asking people to collaborate with the same people. You're looking at this across different parts and different silos in the enterprise. So we have a number of content items and guidance and approaches that are proven within organizations to help improve collaboration. So another question on the difference between IBP, demand planning and forecasting, and S&OP on the top 5 focus slides. So that is a very good question. And that is a question that APQC looks at every year, because we did a survey, I want to say 2 years ago, and I thought what we would find is that organizations would say that they're using IBP. And at that time, only 15% were, and a lot more were using sales and operations planning. And some people have described integrated business planning as the big brother or the older cousin of S&OP. And a lot of companies say that the difference for them is adding in finance and adding in an enterprise kind of layer on top of it. So it's not just multiple functions coming together, it's an entire enterprise type view. And demand forecasting is one part of demand forecasting, supply planning, supply forecasting are also part of the supply chain planning. So one of the things that you all have access to is APQC's process classification framework, which is basically, we take all the practices or the activities, the processes that happen in a generic enterprise and break them down into 13 categories of work. And so that's where you can see what is demand planning and the activities, and how does that roll up to supply chain planning, and how does that roll up to supply chain, and so forth. So I would refer you to our process classification framework and some of the work we've done on end-to-end business processes. And just a reminder for everyone who has a few reminders for everyone who attended today. We have the slides and the recording will be sent to you for registering for the webinar. We also have a short webinar satisfaction survey that we'd like you to take once the webinar closes. And you're welcome to visit apqc.org/events to learn more about upcoming or past webinars. You can watch webinars on demand as well. And I see another question that has come in about collaboration. And I think that collaboration being the top concern for the folks on this call makes sense that we're getting questions here. The question is, do I think collaboration between supply chains will be increased in the Industry 4.0 era? And that's a very interesting question. And when you start talking about connected supply chains and industry, Internet of Things, IoT, and sensors that are all connected, and you can start to gather data, and we see things like blockchain, not from a crypto perspective, but from a supply chain perspective, coming into play. I think that there's only one direction forward for collaboration, and that's to increase, with recognizing that there are risks from cybersecurity threats. As more and more things are connected, that just means there's more and more opportunities for bad actors to get access. So I think that we'll see an increase in collaboration along with an increase in focus on cybersecurity and protecting our supply chains from a technology perspective. There's also physical security risks to supply chains. You know, trains can be, there's some very horrifying visuals of trains that were looted and people's Christmas gifts strewn all over the rail yard. And we have ships having to reroute due to attacks from rebels and different terrorists in different areas. So there's physical risk, but there's a whole lot of technology risks that supply chains are facing. So I do think we'll see an increase in collaboration, though, as organizations start to figure out what their ecosystem or their network really looks like. So as a reminder, you will be hearing from APQC, and you're always welcome to reach out to me and contact me or any of my other APQC colleagues. And also, you're always welcome to connect with us. If you haven't already, please follow us on social media and stay engaged with us and get our latest updates. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today and taking time out for this webinar. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.